Sargasso by Ward Muir. At the end of September, the tramp steamer Wellington was posted missing, and a number of placid persons in Cardiff and Liverpool and elsewhere, having speculated in insuring her when she became overdue, became appreciably richer without any special effort, beyond that of enduring a temporary anxiety. The insurance company paid the Wellington's owners without the slightest fuss. The said owners made preparations to buy a new steamer. 2 or 3 small milliners earned a trifling profit on selling black attire to the wives of various officers and sailors. And thus the matter ended. Cash changed hands, and here and there a heart was broken, and a few families orphaned. That was all. The Wellington had sailed from Cardiff for Trinidad, and vanished. The southern wastes of the North Atlantic had swallowed her up, and told no tale of her vanishing. No storms had been recorded. There were no rocks or shoals uncharted on her route, no derelicts upon which she might have struck and done herself injury had been reported. Obviously she had sunk. There was no other explanation to offer. She could not have taken to herself wings and flown into the heavens. She could not have evaporated. She could not have blown herself to bits so small that none had floated and been recovered. Undoubtedly she had sunk. But what had caused her to sink? And why, when she sunk, had not the crew taken to the boats? Here was a mystery. The sea holds many similar mysteries, and holds them tight. To this day, the riddle of the Wellington might have remained unsolved. Such unsolved riddles brood over innumerable homes in every seaport. Had not the Pennsylvania happened to cruise across a certain patch of ocean on a certain day 4 years later? The Pennsylvania, belonging to the United States Navy, was on a scientific mission, looking for new kinds of fish, or new kinds of algae, or new kinds of something else. It does not concern us to inquire what it was looking for. Learned professors with microscopes and dredging apparatus were on board, and the learned professors were certainly not looking for the Wellington. Nevertheless, they found her riding calmly on a silver sea, intact from her keel to the top of her masts, her engines apparently undamaged, her cargo untouched and perfect, but for some slight decay, her boats whole and sound, and her cabin, well, there were things, or the remains of things, in her cabin, which we need not dwell upon. To put the matter gently, the one passenger on board the Wellington was death. Extraordinary, said the lieutenant, commanding the exploring party which went aboard the derelict. The Pennsylvania's doctor was set to work to examine the things in the cabin, and he pronounced a remarkable verdict. Died of starvation, he said. No disease otherwise, as far as I can see. An engineer, who was sent below to look at the silent and rusted engines, said that with a little tinkering they could be put into good enough order to take the Wellington home. Nothing wrong with the engines, he remarked, except maybe a bit of strain. There's tons of coal in the bunkers. Then came a professor who had been employing the time paddling about the ship in the dinghy. See this, he said. He held up a string of weed. I've been bathing while you fellows made your examination. Dived and had a look at the screw. Found this. The screw's gone, I suppose? Asked the lieutenant. The loss of the screw is the only thing that could have stopped them, though why they didn't take to the boats or set sails when they shed their screw, goodness only knows. The professor was grave. The screw's all right, but there was some of this wrapped round it. Again he held up the dripping trail of weed. Well, naturally she's got weedy, drifting like this for goodness knows how long. Maybe. The professor flung the weed on the deck and took out a cigar. Ever heard of Sargasso weed? He asked as he struck a match. Then he began to smoke thoughtfully. It's only a guess, he went on. Sargasso could have done it, and unless you people find a better explanation, mine is the best so far. Yes, Sargasso, that's my contribution to the problem. Sargasso is my guess. The doctor returned from the cabin where the things were, carrying a little bundle of sheets of paper. No need to argue, he said. Here's the whole story. It seems like there was a journalist on board, taking a voyage for his health. He's written it all down, at least nearly all. The end wouldn't bear writing, I reckon. This was what the journalist wrote in his diary. Sunday morning. A curious thing has happened, and in order that I may keep the details clear in my mind, so as to be able to send an account to my paper when we reach Trinidad, I am writing a condensed description now. Last night, as we were steaming full speed ahead as usual, and I was below, lying on the cabin sofa, reading a novel, I suddenly felt the ship give a most peculiar movement. The sensation of motion forwards is so permanently present in one's mind when one is travelling on board a vessel in mid-ocean that one forgets it. At this moment I suddenly, even violently, became aware not of this sensation, but of its stoppage. The stoppage was not a sharp one. It did not feel as though we had, say, run on a rock with a bump. Well, there was no bump. Nevertheless, I was nearly rolled off the sofa, and only saved myself by a clutch at its back. The ship had, as it were, taken a dive backward, instead of a dive forward. It had not done so with a jar. On the contrary, it had done so smoothly, and with a slur, much as a locomotive does when it glides very gently against a spring buffer. The only effect in the cabin beyond my own experience was that a bottle of sarsaparilla, which stood on the table, fell over and rolled off it. I sat up and listened. The screw was still going, and the ship was vibrating a good deal, but somehow I had lost the sensation of moving forward, which one always feels when one listens to the screw. An instant later, the captain, who had been in his berth, came running out in his trousers and shirt-sleeves. "Stop the engines, Mr. Bunce," I heard him yell to the mate as he ran on deck. A second later, the telegraph tinkled, and the engines slowed down and stopped. There was silence. I followed the captain on deck. He was on the bridge now, and I could see his face by the light of a lamp which hung there. He looked bewildered. I joined him. "What's up?" I asked. "Blowed if I know," he said. "If there were any sandbanks hereabouts." Sandbanks in mid-Atlantic, sure. He stared into the darkness ahead. The night was black. There should have been a moon, but it was hidden behind thick clouds. Now that the ship had stopped, one realized that the heat was considerable. Not a breath of wind stirred the air. "Must have the arc," said the captain. The masthead arc light, which is used when the ship is loading in port, sputtered and then blazed. Its pallid rays shot forth on every side and illuminated the sea. The sea. Was it the sea? Ahead of us lay a vast and stolid tract of something motionless and sinister. Mud? No, not mud. It was less motionless than I had thought. It moved slightly now and then with the swell. Its surface was not water, at any rate. It glistened, but it did not glitter as water does, and it was wrinkled here and there with solid yet sinuous markings. Certainly it was not water.
"Weed, by Jove," muttered the captain. "Yards of it, hundreds of yards of it for aught I know. I've heard of gulf weed, but never seen anything like this. Too much trouble trying to plough through it. We'll back out, wait for the dawn, and then shape a course round the edge of it. Weed's no joke when there's such a lot of it. Full speed astern, Mr. Bunce, please."
The mate signalled to the engine room, and a hollow rumble rose from below. The ship trembled. For a minute we stood, and then the captain sprang to the telegraph and swung round its handle to stop.
"Must have a look astern first," he said. "Weeds in the propeller, I fancy. May have to clean it out to be safe."
He spoke jerkily. I went with him to the poop, and we let down a lantern over the rudder. There was weed there, too. Not much, a foot or two maybe, crawling round our stern. The ship had swung, and instead of backing straight out of the weed, it was forcing its way into it, in a path parallel with its margin. The margin was plainly visible. Nice, clean sea gleamed quite close to us.
"Awkward," said the captain gruffly. "Difficult to get steerage way on her. Must try, though."
He went back to the bridge, leaving the mate as lookout astern. Again the engines rumbled, this time a shade more noisily than before, and one felt the ship straining to be free of its entanglement. It heaved slightly and rocked. As it did so, a faint and not unpleasant odour rose from the weed overboard. The captain wiped his brow.
"No go,"
he said at last, and signalled afresh to the engineers to stop.
"Must put out a boat astern to cut the weed. It's getting round our screw."
He thought for a while, and then added,
"Better wait till daylight, though."
We waited, and at last the dawn came, grey from the east. The clouds furled like canopies, and when the sun rose, the sky was clear and blue. There was something cheerful about that blue sky, and I think it raised our spirits. Although day showed us a grim prospect ahead, as far as the eye could reach, the weed lay, thick matted, bubbling and blistering in the sun, and heaving oilily in the unseen swell.
"Must be miles across,"
said the captain, after he had inspected it through a telescope from the masthead.
"Miles, by Jove. Never heard of such a thing in my life. Chunks of weed a few yards square. Yes, you meet them anywhere. Even in the blooming Mediterranean I've seen them. And there are islands of weed in the Pacific. But this isn't an island. It's a continent. Well, the sooner we're quit of the continent, the better."
The space of weed which divided us off from the friendly ocean behind had grown a little wider, I thought, during the hours of the night. But a boat let down could clear a path through it without difficulty, and we could then back out and proceed on our way, and I should have a fine story for the newspapers. The boat was lowered and sank squelching into the surface of the weed. Bubbles rose round it and burst, giving off that peculiar smell which I had noticed before, and which I now began to dislike. Some of the crew, a queer set of ragamuffins of all nations from Cardiff, got down into the boat. It rode buoyantly on, or in, the weed. The crew got out the oars. Then came the first hint of alarm. The boat would not budge. The oars made no impression on the weed. They merely scooped it up in strings and skeins. The boat nosed the weed and moved elastically to and fro in it at each stroke of the oars. But not an inch forward did it travel. The men sweated at their oars and cursed. but their labours were utterly in vain. The captain swore softly.
"Mast there,"
he called at length. The men stopped rowing.
"Mr. Bunce, you must climb over the stern and find out whether we can do anything with knives. We'll swing you down on a rope."
The knives were useless. Mr. Bunce cut and slashed at the weed, lifted shovelfuls of it out of the water, and made no difference. Even if he had been able to clear a patch of water, fresh weed would have flowed in instantly and filled it up. But he had not even the momentary encouragement of making any clearance whatever. The weed was feet thick, fathoms thick perhaps. A pole pushed down into it resisted the push to its full length. Somewhere beneath there must be open water, just as beneath the thickest ice there is open water. How deep beneath, it was impossible to tell. The engines were set going again, furiously battling with this implacably enveloping monster. The ship trembled and swayed, pushed its stern perhaps a yard back, and then rebounded a yard forward again. Result? Nil.
"We're stuck,"
said the captain. And stuck we were. Presently someone noticed that the boat, which had been put overside, was not so near as it had been. Exploring tendrils of weed had come between the Wellington and it. We were drifting apart, silently, hardly perceptibly. A rope was thrown to the boat, and it was hauled in, very, very slowly, and with an enormous effort. Our respect for the weed deepened as we saw how tenaciously it resisted the passage of the boat, and clung to its keel, as though with suckers. The boat was hoisted aboard again, and the crew went to their midday meal. Monday morning. We are still embedded in the weed, and the open sea is further astern. All yesterday and all last night the engines were kept going intermittently, without the slightest appreciable effect. This is terrible. A lookout is kept at the masthead in case some passing vessel could be hailed. If we could get a rope to a steamer in the open sea, she might tow us out. If no steamer comes, the captain has declined to say what will happen if no steamer comes. And every hour the strip of weed which divides us from the sea grows an inch or so wider. Either it is actually growing, and that at an amazing pace, or else the Wellington is being absorbed by some curious power into the centre of this slimy continent. Tuesday. The hands are beginning to murmur. They want to abandon the ship. The captain is loath to do so, as long as there is coal in the bunkers and the engines can continue to make efforts to free us. Later. As I wrote the above, the engines broke down. Cables of weeds have enveloped the propeller, and the engines, though not actually injured, have sustained a severe strain, and have had to be stopped for repair. Wednesday. The open sea is now a good 100 feet distant. On every side of us stretches this desert of oozy weed. It is horrible, and its stench is beginning to affect our health. Much of it appears to be dead matter, and undoubtedly is decaying. Possibly fish have got enmeshed in the weed and killed. Perhaps there are even embedded in it carcasses of whales. Thursday. The crew are now openly revolting, and the captain has consented to make an attempt to abandon the Wellington. To leave her in boats is plainly impossible. No power on earth could drive the boats through the slough of the weed. The carpenter has suggested that boards could be laid down on the surface of the weed. They cannot sink. It may be feasible to make a sort of pathway or elongated raft of lashed boards and walk along it, carrying a boat till the edge of the weed mass is reached. A party are to try the experiment this afternoon. Meanwhile, the boards are being prepared. Later. Horrible. Horrible. The boards were let down overside, and sure enough they lay on the weed with reasonable firmness. Men got down onto them and began cautiously to throw out other boards which were lashed to the first lot, and so on. The pathway grew. It heaved up and down slightly, but otherwise gave a fair foothold. The men hardly got their boots wet walking on it. It was an extraordinary sight. The men worked rapidly, even feverishly, and the odd path of wood grew longer and longer. At last, the final planks were laid, their ends touching the verge of the weed. The men at the end of the path cheered wildly, and I don't wonder. The mere sniff of open water must have been exhilarating. They came back to the ship, and a boat, the smallest we have, was let down. Under its weight, the boards sank a little, really wonderfully little. Weed lapped up over the boards, but that was of no consequence. The gang of men lifted the boat, and very slowly and with the utmost care carried it seaward. It was now sundown, but already the moon had risen, and there was plenty of light. Those who were left on board watched the progress of the boat carriers with intense excitement. They were perhaps halfway towards the sea when an awful thing happened. Words fail to describe it. It was an upheaval of the most terrible description. For a second or two I positively thought that some vast monster underneath the weed had lifted itself or rolled over. At any rate, what occurred was this. A mighty billow, a giant undulation, suddenly arose in the weed and swept across it. We on board the Wellington had to hold on for our lives. The ship literally stood on end. For one instant her stern was high in the air. The next her prow was high, and the stern fathoms beneath us. We clung, I say, for we had seen the wave coming, if wave it could be called, a sprayless, solid, treacle-like mountain range. The next instant the wave had reached the men who were on the plank pathway. The pathway rose skyward and writhed. There was a long cry of fear, and all was over. Men and boat and pathway all vanished into the morass. They went down into its sticky depths, and their cries were drowned, smothered. Friday. The captain says that the upheaval was due to a submarine volcanic eruption. No one particularly cares what the explanation might be. All we know is that for an hour or so after the upheaval, the weed in our neighbourhood was thinner. It had got broken and disintegrated, and by a supreme effort we might have forced our way out of it. But the engines were useless. The irony of it. Such wind as there is seems to blow persistently towards the centre of the continent of weed. Otherwise we should set sails and try what drifting can do to save us. We are, of course, preparing to make another wooden pathway. Alas, now far lengthier than the first one. The end of the first pathway was roped to the ship, but we cannot draw it in. The weed hangs to it immovably, and is a dead drag on it. Saturday. The second pathway was begun this morning, and when half made, turned traitor. Its far end began to be crawled over by weed, then more weed, and then still more. The pathways are useless. Sunday. We've been a week in the weed. Now, except from the masthead, the open sea is no longer visible. Are we really doomed? It is difficult to believe that we are. There is plenty of food on board, plenty of coal in the bunkers. But of what use are food and coal? Monday. Still no hope. The engines are working again. They produce no effect whatsoever. Tuesday. Our position is getting on our nerves. An Italian, one of the crew, swears that in the night he saw an immense creature come out of the weed and try to crawl on deck. Pressed to describe the creature, he said it was like a stupendous lizard with luminous eyes. Nonsense, of course, but I don't wonder at the fellow's alarm. This is an eerie place. Wednesday. We are on short rations. It is common sense, but the crew are grumbling. Thursday. The accumulators have given out, and we can only get our electric light at night by gearing straight onto the dynamos. The captain is looking queer. It seems that he was on deck last night, and he too confesses that he thought he saw something. Some living thing in the weed. He refuses to describe it, but says it had an audible voice. Friday. Are there creatures? Last night I took a watch on deck. The moon is now waning, but there is still enough light to see the gloomy floor of motionlessness around us. Sometimes it bubbles a little. Sometimes it seems to writhe, and always it glistens iridescently. In the middle of the night, I heard a far-off sound. I gazed in the direction whence it came, and I seemed to see something. A something which swept across the melancholy waste towards the ship, like a bird, and yet not a bird. It was too large to be a bird. And then as it came nearer, I saw that it was not flying, as I had thought. It was really in the weed, but its head, if it was a head, towered above the weed at a height of several feet on top of a comparatively thin neck. The neck ploughed through the weed, hissing and gurgling, and the head came nearer and nearer. It sank and vanished. The weed closed over it with a swirl. Had there really been anything there? Now that I think the thing over in the cold light of day, I believe the whole vision was imaginary. But if this is the sort of vision we are to suffer from, well, we had better abandon our night watches on deck, or we shall have insanity to battle with, as well as weed. Saturday. The crew have mutinied. They want to get at the stores, and particularly at the liquor. The captain, the mate, and 2 engineers and myself have barricaded ourselves in the cabin. Sunday. A fortnight gone. Monday. We have parleyed with the men, but no use. Tuesday. Yes, there certainly are creatures in this horrible weed desert. Last night as we lay in the cabin, something scraped against the side of the ship. Dark mass went across the porthole and momentarily blotted out the moonlight. And then there was silence. We saw no more, and we dared not go on deck for fear of the crew, who have a revolver and have threatened to shoot at sight. Wednesday. Are our brains becoming unhinged? Last night we all 4 woke at the sound of a bellowing, whistling noise beside the ship. From the portholes nothing was visible. The origin of the sound was further forward. Then came a scraping noise, like that we heard on Tuesday night, but lighter, more like the sound of gentle touching, the touching of a tentacle, whereas the previous sound was like the dragging of a heavy hawser. The tentacle, if tentacle it was, withdrew after a while. Dawn came, and nothing was to be seen from the portholes but the old pavement of weed, empty and devoid of life. Thursday. Last night, the scraping came again, and this time the creature, whatever it was, dragged up onto the deck, at least so it seemed, and swept to and fro for a while, knocking things about. Before dawn it withdrew. Friday. It came again last night, and hardly had it reached the deck when there was an awful cry from forward. Saturday. The crew have joined us, in view of the fighting of a common foe. What the foe is, none of us know. All we know is that the boatswain was on deck and was carried off by the creature, shrieking. Sunday. 3 weeks gone now. Thanks to the truce which has been called with the crew, we are now able to go on deck as much as we like. In the shelter of the chart house we lay in wait for the coming of the creature last night, but it did not appear. The captain thinks that we must now be more than a mile deep in the weed. It is plain that he has abandoned all hope of escape. Monday. Tragedy today. The captain blew out his brains with his revolver. Was he wise, I wonder? May it not be better to embrace death promptly than to wait till some horrible slow torture kills one, inch by inch, or till madness comes? Tuesday. Some of the crew have got at the liquor. Reasoning logically, I begin to perceive that they are no more foolish than the captain. Wednesday. The junior engineer today fixed wide slabs of wood to his boots and essayed to walk on the surface of the weed. What he expected to be able to do, even if he reached the open sea, I don't know. that the experiment failed immediately. He capsized, and the weed swallowed him. Thursday. The creature came again last night, and we all saw it. Heaven help us. Friday. The mate has gone mad. Later, the mate had to be shot in self-defense. Saturday. The ship's carpenter came to me today and begged me to shoot him. I haven't the pluck, sir, myself. Horrible. Of course I could not do it. Sunday. 4 weeks. The ship's carpenter had more pluck than he gave himself credit for. I am now alone in the cabin with the remaining members of the crew, all raving drunk. Tonight, if the creature comes again, I shall go out to meet it. The diary ended here.
Then it was Sargasso weed after all,
said the lieutenant slowly.
You were right, Professor, but how the deuce did the ship get out of it in the end? Another volcanic upheaval, only this time a real big one, said the Professor. The weed is known to gather like that. It grows amazingly fast, a foot or more in an hour, I've heard say, and it dies quickly too, and it sinks like lead. Once it had got as thick as this poor chap describes, well, nothing but a volcanic upheaval would disperse it. I guess there was a grand bust-up. The weed was shredded right and left, and then there came, maybe, a stunning storm, and here we find the Wellington in clear ocean, practically none the worse. The lieutenant chewed at his cigar. And the creatures to which the writer refers,
he queried tentatively. The Professor shrugged his shoulders. There are more things in heaven or earth, he quoted.
You think it really existed?
The Professor held out his hand, the palm open. Ever see a scale like that? He asked. The lieutenant gazed at the open hand. A large scale, the scale apparently of an enormous fish, lay there, shining dully in the sun. Where did you find that? It's a darn big scale, by gosh, 2 inches across at least, and as firm as steel. That scale, said the Professor, carefully putting it into his pocket-book, belongs to no fish, crustacean, or mammal, or reptile, or anything else that I've ever heard of. That's all I can tell you, except that I found it fixed, glued by its own slime, to the side of the wheelhouse. The lieutenant and the Professor looked at each other. Then the doctor, who had been listening, spoke. I thank my stars I wasn't on board the Wellington anyway, he said. Today's story was Sargasso by Ward Muir. It was read by me, Jasper L'Estrange. Well, I do hope you enjoyed it. And until next time, sweet dreams.